Great. Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Michelle Drake. I'm with the Marin County Office of Education. We are so thrilled to have you all here for this very important session with the Spahr Center. It's Teach Pride Reach Wide Workshop. The session is being recorded and will be available on our website within 24 hours. It is also being simultaneously translated in Spanish. Thank you to Marta Bitone, who was our amazing, wonderful translator. I will now share this in Spanish. Hola y bienvenido al Enseñe Orgullo Llegue Lejos del Spahr Center. Este webinar se transmite simultáneamente en español. Haga clic en el botón de interpretación del idioma que aparece en su pantalla si desea escuchar esto en español. Muchas gracias a Marta Bitón, que es nuestra intérprete esta tarde. And now I would like to introduce you to Beth Cradipole, coordinator here for the Marin County Office of Education. Again, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Hello, welcome for being here. We're thrilled to have the Spahr Center here to share their recent launch of the LGBTQ plus toolkit to support with teachers, parents, and guardians from around the county in achieving LGBTQ inclusive schools. The Spahr Center is a nonprofit community agency devoted to serving, supporting, and empowering Marin's LGBTQ plus community and everyone in the county living and with and affected by HIV. So through the work we can accomplish together, Marin is a healthy, inclusive community where every person lives with freedom and equality. Today, we have two facilitators leading this session. Fel Agrigules, is that right, Fel? You helped me with that last name, I'm sorry.
Nearly, it's Agrilius.
Agrilius, thank you. She's the youth program coordinator for the Spahr Center. And Rory Sante, is that correct, Rory?
That's correct.
And the Spirit Center's MSW, the Master of Social Work intern. We have also a student panel who will launch this workshop. Again, thank you all for being here and being part of this meaningful journey. I now hand it over to Fel.
Sweet, thank you for those introductions, and thank you everybody for being here. The toolkit's in the chat and we'll be sending it out throughout the next hour, and you also, if you're registered on Eventbrite, we'll send it out in an email after the fact as well. So no need to worry about reading it or keeping track of it right now. We will make sure that you get it. It's really my pleasure to be able to offer this support to teachers, school administrators, parents to use when working with schools, because it's really a one-stop shop to launch yourself towards LGBTQ allyship. And I think you'll find a lot of information in it that doesn't need a lot of prefacing. Because of that, we're going to spend most of this hour hearing directly from students on their experiences in schools in Marin, ways that folks have tried to be allies that haven't necessarily gone so successfully, and what feels most important for them to see from teachers and others who want to develop into allies. And then from there, hopefully the toolkit will be the next step after you feel inspired hearing from these students. If you have any particular questions that you want to be addressed, feel free to send me a message in the chat, and then I will fold them into our conversation. We have lots of students to hear from, so we'll be hearing from them mostly in the things that they've already prepared, and we'll answer questions if possible as well. Yeah, and I think without further ado, let's have our first three students introduce themselves. They are part of our Middle School Leadership Institute and started with us last summer, learning social justice theories, public speaking skills, about school advocacy, and then this year prioritized school-based advocacy as their focus in their work. So Jacob, sorry, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Jacob. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm a 7th grader at Miller Creek Middle School.
And jump right in if you'd like.
Okay. So in 6th grade, I only come out as gay to my family and a few friends. I did not have the best choice in friends because all I cared about was popularity. One day after school, one of my then friends and I got into a fight. When I said that I didn't want to be their friend anymore because they were being unkind, they threatened to out me to the whole school before I was ready. They threatened to take my opportunity to say this is who I am to all my friends. So I took action. They were going to out me if I come out before them. Even if I wasn't ready, I wanted it to come from me. So the next day at school, I told all my friends and people I was familiar with. As expected, at the end of the day, almost everyone in 6th grade knew. I was proud of what I had done, but it still felt so weird and ashamed, like I hadn't really figured it out fully. Felt like I had just told everybody who I was, but I didn't know who I was personally. I was so confused. I barely even knew what LGBTQ meant. I don't want anyone to feel that way, which is why we need to educate people on LGBTQ topics. I doubt that if the person who had threatened to out me had known more about the LGBTQ community, that they still would have outed me. It's 2021, and people need to learn and accept. People shouldn't have to be hiding who they are because other people say it's wrong. There's no place for hate anywhere. I believe that if we work hard enough, we can really make a change. To make the world a safer place for all LGBTQ people living in fear. We can do it.
Thank you so much, Jacob, for sharing. Lily, would you like to go next?
Yeah, so hi, my name's Lily. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm also a 7th grader at Miller Creek Middle School. So when I came out, I felt alone. I didn't have anyone to talk to or anyone who would understand me. I lost friends, got recount comments, and not all my family members were thrilled about it either. I felt like an outsider, like an alien. I didn't know where to go or what to do. I didn't even know who I was anymore. My family and friends treated me differently, like I was some person they never met. That hurt me because all I wanted was for them to know and not make a big deal about it, for it to not impact my relationships with them. Maybe what I'm saying sounds really harsh, but compared to many people in my situation, I have it easy. Some kids are disowned and thrown out of the house. Some kids are forced to come out. Some kids lose their entire support system and never learn to accept themselves. So if my story is considered easy, what do you think the kids who have it worse than me feel like? What do you think their experiences were, and how do you think they coped with that? All people struggling and grappling with their identities deserve a wonderful support system and a safe place to call home. Education is a crucial concept in this situation, and it all starts with the adults. It is vital that all adults be educated on topics of diversity because if they continue to be ignorant, it will pass on to the kids, which will impact others' lives. Words have consequences, they always have and they always will. Teachers should have training on matters of diversity, specifically the LGBTQ community. If I had known what the LGBTQ community was, if I had been taught about it, or even if the world was at such a place where these things weren't so complex and huge, or it wasn't out of the ordinary for someone not to conform to society's stereotypes, I wouldn't have felt so lost and confused. If my story has taught me anything, it's that I will always be myself. The people who don't accept this community need to accept themselves first. They need to be educated and taught about our history, about the things we've gone through, and the battles we've won.
Thank you so much, Lily, for sharing your story. Annabelle, you're up next.
Hi, my name is Annabelle. You can use any pronouns. One second.
You're good, no problem. Take your time.
Okay, I got it. As far back as 3rd grade, I remember being picked on, mistreated, marginalized, and even physically hurt for being different. I spent many days crying alone in the bathroom at school, struggling with friendships, and questioning my sexuality and where I fit in. By 5th grade, things started to feel clearer even as they were getting harder. One memory that particularly stands out is during the 5th grade family life program at school. A student asked about how same-sex relationships work. The midwife teaching the class just brushed them off, marginalized the question, referring us to her parents, rather than including information about same-sex relationships in her explanation. Though I was 10 years old at the time and hadn't yet come out, this blatant dismissal of LGBTQ topics was, in hindsight, extremely damaging to my mental health and self-confidence. I felt like I didn't matter. Today, the experiences I had in elementary school still affect me. Even though the worst of it is over, I still get many unbelievably rude comments for being different. One example, when I first cut my hair, a kid told me that I shouldn't have cut it because girls are supposed to have long hair. Another kid referred to my friends and me as aliens when he found out that we identified as LGBTQ. Well-meaning teachers have taught lessons based on homophobic ideas and refuse to accept criticism because he is older than we are and he knows what he's talking about. Kids like me who are different in some way or later identify as queer are far too often treated unfairly based on who they are. This is not okay, but there are ways to make it better, starting with education. In my experience, people have been cruel and ignorant not because they intended to, but because they're either unaware or not being held accountable for their actions. Teachers, parents, and other important decision makers need more education about queer issues, inclusivity, and how to better identify and support children who are struggling.
Thank you, Annabelle, and thank you all three of you. Your words are just so powerful, and I'm so grateful that you're involved with Spahr and just doing all the work that you're doing. Now we're going to transition to our high school panel. And the first question that I have for you all is just to talk a little bit about your experiences generally as LGBTQ students in Marin.
I feel like my experience has been most marked by a really big disconnect between supportive policy and the actual lived student experience. I remember as a sophomore, I transferred to 1327 and I was really excited because oh, there's so many policies about being supportive of trans people's name and gender and pronouns. So that made me feel like I was, coming to a really welcoming school. But I remember emailing the registrar before school started to make sure that my name was correct in the records and my dead name wouldn't be displayed in front of the class. And despite going through all of that extra work, the attendance was still messed up. And on the first day of school, I had to go and get a new ID card. And in all of my classes, I was outed and everyone knew my old name. And I don't know how that happened, but I feel like generally, oftentimes the situation painted by the rules and infrastructure looks a lot better than the things that students are actually dealing with.
That holds true with harassment policies in my experience as well. When I was in high school, I had a couple incidents of being called it. And, I sought support from teachers because that is, definitely a form of harassment. It's dehumanizing and a way to marginalize non-binary people who use they them pronouns. It's incredibly hurtful. So I sought out help for that, but the policies of no tolerance on harassment, that sort of stuff, it didn't really help me in my situation. It was kind of just brushed off. Additionally, I've known several people throughout my time in high school who have been harassed, far more severely than I have. And in one circumstance, I tried to go to school administration for my friend who had been called a dyke in a class by another student. And the school couldn't do anything about it for some reason, who knows why. And then the second incident was a trans girl who was being assaulted and she was forced to physically defend herself. And she got in trouble for that. The students who were harassing her and ganging up on her didn't. But because she had to defend herself, she was the one who was, who the blame was pinned on. So I think that schools have a long way to go when it comes to supporting students who are being harassed and how to educate and discipline students who are taking harmful actions against LGBTQ students.
And I think a lot of that starts with teacher education. In my experience at Redwood, I found that a lot of my teachers and a lot of school administrators just didn't know how to handle it when a student was being bullied or when there were homophobic or transphobic slurs being tossed around in the classroom. I had a lot of experiences where I would hear slurs being tossed around right in front of the teacher and they would just brush it off. And I think a lot of that is due to them just either not being able to recognize a slur or just not having enough bystander intervention training for homophobic or transphobic specific issues.
Yeah, training is so important, and also just having like just talking about it. Like, I don't think my school brought up being like LGBTQ or LGBTQ people until 7th grade, which is really shocking, actually. I learned about.
I think we lost you for a sec, Calliope. We caught the first sentence of what you said, Calliope. Maybe you can start from there again.
My Wi-Fi really works. I didn't actually learn. We didn't mention. My school didn't mention being LGBTQ until 7th grade. So I learned everything from friends and the internet, but no one ever we never talked about it in class. We never talked about it in sex ed. We never said anything. And I think that was really detrimental because it kind of just teaches you to not be proud of it or not learn about your history, which really is harmful.
I remember.
Oh,
go ahead. Go for it.
Adding on to Calliope, curriculum is really lacking. I don't think in English class I've ever read any books with a queer or a trans character, let alone something written by an actually queer or trans person. Same thing in history. When we did U.S. history in 8th grade, we didn't learn about Stonewall, we didn't learn about AIDS, any of the really, important and basic moments. And sex ed as well. It's taught from a very, cisgendered and heterosexual lens. And while there's some mention of sexuality and gender a little bit, it's not really enough. And it's not like it's a space where queer kids are comfortable asking questions in front of their probably mostly straight class who they've heard using slurs or saying homophobic and transphobic things. So it's the type of thing where more inclusive curriculum, training, that type of stuff could go so far. And the lack of it is really hurtful.
I remember in my social issues class, the one day we talked about LGBTQ issues, my teacher was so visibly uncomfortable that the other students were laughing, more so than they did for heterosexual sex ed. That's not an environment where I felt very comfortable asking questions, especially as a closeted freshman. So.
Yeah, I remember in my 7th grade sex ed class, our teachers gave us a worksheet with bisexual, transgender, a bunch of the terms in it. And they're kind of just guess what these terms mean? And and of course, a lot of the kids did not know what that meant. So you kind of have to just say, and so it's not something that's a teaching moment. It's more of the other students trying to guess what it is.
I also had an experience with changing pronouns and name and kind of the education around how that's responded to, because there isn't a clear process at my school for changing name and pronouns, but I was lucky enough to have reached out to one teacher who showed me the kind of underground form to fill out, and there was a lot in there about taking care of my mental health and checking in, which was awesome. And my teacher liaison was super helpful and supportive, and emailed all the teachers for me, but that kind of follow-up wasn't ever really provided. And I had one teacher who for a whole semester, long class, kept misgendering me, which made me dread that block and makes it so hard for trans kids to feel supported if the teacher won't even get it right. But luckily, other than that, the adults at my school have been super amazing, and I feel really lucky to have the support that I did. I even have been able to start leading a trans and gender queer group, which is a super cool resource I wish I'd had, but I know that that's not the norm for most LGBTQ and trans kids at school. They don't have a space like that or a process for changing their pronouns or names, or they're not able to participate on sports teams, or a lot more that really needs to be there and isn't, that makes it super hard to just be yourself in high school.
Yeah, I go to the same high school as Elliot. We go to Marin Academy, and since transitioning, it's been a lot of it's been a better experience than a lot of my friends who go to other schools have had in getting my name changed on documents and emails and stuff like that. But other than that, I feel like since transitioning, I feel like I felt really unwelcome in sports. I still need a season of a sport to fulfill my PE credit to graduate. And I have been going back and forth with the athletic director, and it's sort of difficult because they don't want to put me on either the boys or the girls team. And honestly, I don't want to be on either of those teams. And it's just sort of difficult to reconcile since it is such a binary system. And, honestly, I don't know the solution to trans people in sports. There are people who are definitely much more involved in that work than I am, but it's definitely felt isolating. Since I used to really love playing sports and being on the girls' soccer team. That was a really nice environment for me and for 10 years of my life. And it feels like that's something that I can't really access anymore. And that's sort of disheartening, but most of the difficulties I faced in high school as a trans person have been sort of microaggressions, where I've had teachers who just refuse to refer to me by any pronouns. They'll just say my name over and over and over again. And it's just I don't know if it's because they don't know how to refer to me or because they feel uncomfortable referring to me with my preferred pronouns. And it just makes it sort of an awkward relationship and an uncomfortable environment. And then there are things like teachers will sometimes say okay, now that we've heard from all the boys, can we get a girl to speak? And it's I haven't spoken. And that kind of stuff. It's just these small things add up to create an unwelcoming environment. But I think Marin Academy has a really accepting environment compared to my middle school. I went to Davidson Middle School, and there were just the student body were very comfortable throwing around homophobic slurs. I cut my hair short in 8th grade, and multiple people unprompted who I didn't even know just told me that I looked like a dyke, and asked me if I was a dyke, stuff like that. It was a pretty homophobic environment, and I feel like it's definitely gotten better as I've transitioned to high school, but it's not perfect.
Thank you for sharing everything, everybody. It's always so sad to hear the difficulties in schools, but I feel really hopeful about the potential for us to commit to allyship and supporting LGBTQ students, and that we all can do it. On that frame, I want to transition a little to talking about what some of the specific ways that teachers, administrators, parents could ideally support you. Yeah.
I think that the best thing to do for personally is at the beginning of every class, just say homophobia is not tolerated in this class, or transphobia is not tolerated in this class, and just make that extremely clear. And then just go around making sure everyone knows that, making sure everyone knows how to use everyone's proper pronouns, and just showing that you're a resource for them.
I think teachers, you can go ahead.
Okay. I think that having a plan for what you're going to do when you hear or see harassment happening in your class is really important, because I feel like a lot of teachers get caught off guard. So making a plan and making sure you're prepared and educated enough to deal with that before it happens is really important, so that you're able to step up in the moment.
Yeah, similar to that, I was going to say teachers and administration being prepared to advocate for their LGBTQ students. It is, being able to actually speak for them and stand up for them, because a lot of the times we don't have the resources or the confidence to stand up for ourselves when we've grown up in a world that continues to beat us down for who we are.
Yeah, right off of that, I have had experience where allies really want to help, and they'll say to me, like, please call me out if ever I do something wrong, or like any wrong pronouns and that kind of thing. And it is all really well intentioned, but that again is putting an improper burden on us as queer people. And so it's important to, like Grace and Alex said, to do the work proactively and to already have a plan and to independently make sure you can name and label and respond to microaggression. So that's not the student who typically is going to be the victim in that circumstance speaking up, telling you it's wrong, and then telling you what to do.
Emily makes a really good point about taking the burden off of the students. So like with pronouns, rather than, telling students to let you know if they have, pronoun needs or whatever, like if you have a beginning of the year survey or beginning of the semester survey, putting that out and having a spot where students can write their pronouns in can be a really big difference. So just educating yourself, because LGBTQ plus people constantly have to tell other people about their identity and about their needs. And if they don't have to do that with teachers, that can be really helpful.
Yeah, adding on to what Chicky was saying, there needs to be a clear, accessible, and effective process for trans students to change their name and pronouns that isn't just that they have to like informally constantly be like updating people. There needs to be a process for students to let their teachers know, to let the admin know, to have it recognized by the school in a way that takes the burden off the kid from correcting everybody constantly. And the process also needs to follow up with the individual because it's not just you come out and then everybody gets it right. It's a constant, you need to correct people, you need to talk to people, and the process needs to be normalized too. Just like asking pronouns at the beginning of the year needs to be normalized, there needs to be as an option, or that it is a thing that exists, that trans people exist and queer kids exist, and that resource needs to be somewhere public and acknowledged by the community in a way that normalizes changing name and pronouns, that allows trans kids to do so in a public way that isn't some sort of taboo underground kind of like process.
Yeah, another thing that's really, really helpful is making sure there's a gender neutral bathroom right by your class, or making sure there's enough around the school. My school, I'm so lucky to go to a school. I go to the Marin Montessori school. I'm really lucky because there's only gender neutral bathrooms, which is so nice. And most public spaces don't have them. And as a non-binary person, that's really difficult to deal with that and to mitigate that, because you just kind of have to sacrifice one or the other. And but at school I can just use whatever bathroom is closest, and it's not like, it's not even something you have to think about. And that should be an option for everyone, and not having to walk across school or having to sacrifice your mental health or your physical safety to go to the bathroom.
Anything else on this front of the best things folks can do to support you all? Or should we move on to the next question? Going once, going twice? Okie dokie. So now our third question is if you all could give some examples of both things that teachers or administrators or others have done that have been particularly awesome and helpful, as well as some things that people have done that had the best intentions in mind but didn't necessarily end that well.
Yeah, so with things that had good intentions but were ultimately misguided, in freshman English class, not on the first day of school, but a couple classes in, I had been misgendered by someone in the class. Someone called me she. and I was using he him pronouns at the time, like in school. So I corrected this student and said he. And that was, that was fine. It went okay. But after the class, when everyone was still in the room, the teacher came up to me and asked very loudly, what are your gender pronouns? And that essentially just like outed me in front of an entire class of strangers, when I had already, done the scary part of correcting someone in the moment when it had happened. It was, it's important to ask people for their pronouns, but it's not all right to just ask one person who you're unsure of. Like, you should be asking everyone, because you can't know someone's pronouns just by looking at them. And it's not okay to ask that sort of question, when you're not in private with the student, when it's not a safe space. As for things that have been positive, I've in other instances where people have been saying slurs in class, or I've been misgendered, teachers have sometimes, seen the effect that it had on me, and like pulled me aside after class to make sure that I was okay, and to ask what they should do going forward. And that was very good, and made me feel like they were looking out for me. Additionally, when teachers have ensured that I have access to spaces like locker rooms and bathrooms, and when I've had a biology teacher who asked me if I would help her go over some of her curriculum material when talking about like sexual anatomy, and that just showed me that she really cared about making sure her class was an equitable space, and was, the material was appropriate for trans students.
I'm going to bounce off of you there for curriculum, because I feel like it's something a lot of teachers stumble over, even if they're very well intentioned and trying to integrate LGBTQ topics into their curriculum. I don't know if this is a common thing, but in my English classes, we had a debate unit. And one of the debate topics, we had a debate on gay marriage. We also had a debate on transitioning for youth. And that's trans youth should not have to debate in front of their peers whether or not they should have access to appropriate medical care. Gay kids should not have to debate in front of their peers whether or not they should be able to get married. It's just not an appropriate subject to integrate into a debate unit. A much better way to integrate these subjects into an English class, in my case, would be to read books written by queer and trans authors, or something like that. Just don't make peers argue about basic human rights. That's not appropriate.
I think kind of not in opposition, but on a different note, I feel like I've had a few like very positive experiences. I remember my freshman year, a teacher knew I was trans, and before writing, she was like writing a letter to my parents for some reason, and beforehand she checked with me because she wanted to make sure that she didn't accidentally out me to my parents, or that, she understood the situation that was going on at my house, so she would, she wouldn't accidentally put me in danger. And I feel like the fact that she even thought to do that, I think, is not something that a lot of teachers would have done, and it made me feel like she really both like understood the situation I was living with, and also like truly cared about me, and like was able to support me as best as possible. And I still think about that teacher today, just because she was like so cool, and one of the few teachers who I felt really like understood what it is to be a trans student, and also was very committed to like supporting me.
Yeah, one of my friends had pretty much the complete opposite of that experience. One of my like head teachers accidentally outed one of my friends to his parents, and that was really scary for him and a lot to deal with. And my school's generally like a place where people feel safe, and I haven't been called a slur there, and people will rarely call me a girl or whatever, and it's a really safe environment. But even that happens, and it's just a lot of times just checking in with the kids. But one thing that was really nice, in eighth grade, we spent like a few days talking about Stonewall and like learning about it in history class, which was a really great experience.
I had an experience once that was more negative, but last year, freshman year, I was on a sports team, and several of the girls on the team had been using like homophobic language in passing and using a few slurs and stuff. And I kind of brought it up and was like, hey, I'm gay. That makes me feel really bad and that's really harmful. And it didn't stop after that. And so like I got really upset at one point, to the point that I had to like sit out of practice because I was really, really upset. And my coach was like, what's going on? And I explained it to her. And her response was, oh, they didn't mean it that way. You know, these are your teammates, they care about you. And I was like, that was really not helpful in that moment, because it's like, well, they're still doing it after I've told them that it's not cool. And rather than like having a conversation with the team about why homophobic language is harmful and not okay, it was just kind of brushed over, and it never really stopped. And it like made me feel really uncomfortable on a place that was supposed to be like a supportive group teamwork environment. So that was definitely difficult.
I think something well-intentioned that a lot of people do, not just teachers, but it has happened to me with teachers, is that when somebody accidentally misgenders me, often they'll spend like a long time apologizing to me, and they'll make it into this huge deal. And they're like, I would never intentionally do that. Like, it needs to, it makes me feel guilty, and it makes me feel like I have to comfort them because they feel so bad that they misgendered me. Which it really isn't my place to comfort that person for the mistake that they made, especially if it's something that happens over and over again. That's definitely like on them. And I think if you accidentally misgender someone, it shouldn't be a big deal. It should just be correct yourself in the moment if you can. If you can't, maybe have a quick conversation with them later. Say, I'm sorry that happened. It won't happen again. I'm working on it. But keep it short. Don't make them comfort you. That kind of thing.
I know like we've talked about a little bit about sports teams and how that can go. I've actually been really lucky to have at least one super great experience on a sports team. As a non-binary person, I joined, I've played on it before, but after I came out, I was able to keep playing on the water polo team. And I had the coaches check in with me, and it was really stressful. But in the end, it was super worthwhile, and I was able to wear a different uniform. I was able to wear what I was comfortable with, and the coaches tried really hard to change how they addressed the group from ladies or girls to people or players. And just little things like that made me feel like I could keep doing something that I really, really loved, while being accepted for who I was, and that they wanted me there. And that it's not a whole lot of effort, but a lot of the time it's too much. But that can just really make the difference in someone's life. And it made a huge difference in mine. And I think stories like that are kind of rare, but it's a really awesome experience if people can do that for you.
Thank you, everybody, for these helpful things that have happened and some not so helpful things. Do y'all have any last examples on this front that you want to bring up before we transition towards talking about the toolkit itself? And last call for folks who are listening, if you have questions that you want the panelists to address. Yeah, and I'll talk a little bit about elementary school and early childhood related stuff and what Spahr is providing on that front, because I'm getting a lot of questions there too in the chat. So yeah, any last words, any last questions?
Real quick, I just wanted to say, I also go to Marin Academy, which is a very accepting place. And we did have a book by a queer author in our curriculum, but it was by a queer white male person. And like even in queer issues, we have to like incorporate a lot of diversity and inclusivity. And so even if you do have one queer person or like one queer book, that's great, but that's not enough. And it's not okay to like just, take it off your checklist and move on. And it was a really great experience. It was a streetcar named Desire, a classic. But it would have been awesome to see and hear about a more intersectional lens from the queer experience. And also that book wasn't even about a queer character, which is another thing.
Awesome. Thank you for bringing that up, Emily. And that's a perfect segue, I think, to the toolkit. And I think before I even jump into the content of the toolkit itself, we are trying to ground all of this LGBTQ advocacy work with the understanding that in order to create a classroom that's truly safe for LGBTQ students, that classroom also has to be actively anti-racist, right? Because we know that not all LGBTQ students are white, and that for students of color to feel safe who are queer and trans, we also need to be interrogating racism in the ways that discrimination and prejudice shows up in our schools and in our classrooms. So just to frame that first as we jump into the toolkit, thank you for fronting that, Emily, with that last statement. And I'm gonna put the toolkit on the screen. And feel free, if it's not so helpful for you to look at this document and you want to see our faces more, to drag our faces closer to the toolkit, and then you'll see more of us and less of it. So this is something that we created over COVID, recognizing that schools had a lot on their plates, making sure that kids can get back on campus safely, navigating virtual learning, all of that. And we wanted to create more of a one-stop shop that any teacher could bookmark this if they had questions about LGBTQ inclusivity, community norms, curriculum guidelines, trainings that they might be able to ask from their administrators. You'd know that there was a central place where you could find that resource. And that's what the toolkit is. It's a living document, so the best thing to do would be to bookmark it or bookmark the MCOE webpage on LGBTQ equity so that you can stay abreast to any updates that we have. And as always, if you have any questions about the toolkit, about any of what we've talked about, or just need someone to walk the path alongside of you in implementing these practices into your work, reach out to me. And I'm so lucky that it's my job to support educators, parents, families, administrators in doing this work. And we are 1000% here to support you. To address the questions that we got around early childhood education and elementary school stuff specifically, we are still building out more elementary specific resources, as well as ways that schools can talk to parents on the necessity of talking about LGBTQ identities for young children. If you're interested in getting involved in that work, there's a few of you on this call who I've already talked to, and I'm hoping to assemble a sort of work group of parents and teachers and admin across the county, because a lot of elementary schools who are trying to take on this work are experiencing the same thing, whether it's pushback from parents or just questions on best practices. So that's up and coming. Keep this toolkit handy right now, which gives more of a general guidance for K through 12 generally, and know that we'll reach out with more information for elementary school and younger than elementary school resources as well. I think with that, I had one other question too about what services Spahr offers, and then I'll turn it over to Rory to talk through some of the details in our toolkit. As you might have expected, these services are in the document too, so you don't even need to remember what I'm saying. First off, we offer free therapy and sliding scale therapy for LGBTQ young people up to the age of 25. We can see students under minor consent, which means if they don't have safe family relationships and can't talk to their parents about therapy, we can see them without the parents knowing. Best practice is for the parents to be looped in, but both are possible. We also have support groups, one for middle schoolers and one for high schoolers right now, as well as one for transitional aged youth and trans adults. And then these social justice leadership programs. All of the speakers that you've heard from today are part of our middle school leadership program and high school social justice fellowship. So if you have queer trans youth in your life who you think would benefit from getting involved or are already involved and can benefit from being tapped into Spahr, these would be great offerings for them. And we also have support for caregivers and parents of trans and non-binary folks of all ages. The kids don't have to be youth necessarily. You just have to be a parent or a caregiver of a trans or non-binary person. And that's both more roundtable discussion and support groups, as well as a lunchtime educational series. To get connected to any of these resources, the best thing to do is just to send me an email. We have in the toolkit the information that's most helpful for me to know as you're making a referral. But even if you don't send any of that information along, just reach out and I'll ask you the questions that I need to know and direct you to the folks on our team who will be able to support you. So thank you all for being here so much. And I will turn it over to Rory to talk through more of the details of the toolkit. Rory, do you want me to keep the screen shared or do you want to share it so you can scroll?
I think I'll share it and scroll.
Great.
Right. Perfect. Can everyone see my screen? Looks good. Okay. That's a little bigger. Hi, everybody. My name is Rory. My pronouns are they, them, and I'm an intern at the Spahr Center and helped author this toolkit. And I just want to thank all of the youth who spoke today. It's really incredible to hear your experiences. And we did our best to really inform this toolkit based on the express needs of queer and trans youth in Marin County. So yeah, we appreciate you so much. So I just want to go through this really quick. The last 10 minutes that we have, our introduction about why this is important. I think you got a huge introduction about why this is important from the youth today. We have some statistics here in the beginning as well about the issues that LGBTQ plus youth experience in Marin County. And I won't go into detail about that at this time, but that's something to look at when you're going through the toolkit. So we have a discussion about intersectionality, and we have some resources for creating an anti-racist space and a non-ableist space as well. So we made sure to include those resources in the toolkit because, like Belle was mentioning earlier, we need to be mindful of everyone's intersectional identity. Otherwise, it's not a truly inclusive space for LGBTQ youth. So, a little bit of scrolling here. Belle went through the services that we provide. And then we actually start with one of the inclusive classroom checklists. We created one that you can use. And so we have that listed here. So to start out your semester, you can go through this checklist and see, what are we doing? What can we be doing better? Right. We also have some discussion on laying the groundwork for allyship, how to show up, how to ground yourself and resource yourself emotionally so that you have resiliency and strength when it's time to step in. So we have a discussion about that here. And then again, this is like something we want to repeat, educating yourself first before going to queer and trans youth and asking like, what should I do? It's really important to do that work versus, putting that burden on affected people. And so we have added some resources here for you for that. So yeah, there's an awesome presentation created by Marin County school students on pronouns. We have a resource for understanding your gender created by Gender Spectrum. We have a list of curriculum to add in your classroom, which is another huge gap that's often missing. Making mistakes. This is another thing that was brought up. We have, some discussion on what do you do if you make a mistake? Again, if you misgender someone, correcting yourself and moving on. Also practicing. There's tools for practicing people's names and pronouns. If you notice that you're struggling with it, maybe you can repeat someone's name and their pronouns, maybe repeat sentences, giving that person compliments. That will help you cement that in your brain. And that's a lot better to do, right, than to say, I just keep getting it wrong. I don't know why I keep getting it wrong. There's ways to practice and work on that. So starting the school year off right, some students brought up a survey for collecting pronouns, that information at the beginning of the school year. We have a sample survey included in this toolkit as well. And in that survey, you can ask students, like, how would you like me to refer to you when I'm reaching out to your family? Again, bringing this in so that you're not outing students to parents. And so we have that here, as you can see. We have a discussion on creating brave spaces and classroom norms, and we have a printable document of some suggested classroom agreements in the toolkit that you can use as well. We have a whole discussion about intervening in transphobia and homophobia in the classroom, examples of microaggressions, and student experiences with microaggressions, and some direct and indirect ways that you can intervene, saying things like, this language is unacceptable in this classroom. Some more indirect ways could be, what do you mean by that? I'm curious. A discussion again about taking students aside. If you notice something harmful, checking in with them afterwards, asking how they're doing in the best way that you can be of support. And again, balancing that with not putting the burden on them to come up with every way that you should be showing up and supporting your students, right? There's one more thing I wanted to add here. There is a discussion in the toolkit about, if you see someone misgendered, and it's good to ask this at the beginning of the year too, you can ask how somebody would like to have that intervention happening, because someone, when they're misgendered, some people might want you to step in front of the whole classroom and correct like that. And some people might want you to go to someone one-on-one afterwards. So it's good to check in with students and see how they would like to be supported in that way. We have our Teachbride Curriculum guide listed here. And we have a section on family dynamics and engaging with parents. We also have some more resources for LGBTQ plus youth in Marin County listed here. And finally, we have an index with some terms. Sometimes, there's a lot of terms that we use in here, so we include that at the end. So I will stop sharing my screen now. Is there anything that you feel like I left out, Fel, while going over the toolkit?
Nothing that I can think of, except one thing that Spahr offers to schools is cultural competency trainings for staff, and those can be at all staff meetings. And we also have specific trainings for PE teachers and coaches, mental health providers, counseling teams, etc., as well as, oh gosh, what's our other specific training? Maybe one of you can remind me. I don't remember. Forgive me. So one action item that you all can take on could be to ask your principal or administrators to schedule us to come in to do one of those trainings. We go into depth more about LGBTQ identities and allyship strategies there. And it's all free, co-presented between staff and students. So you're getting the student perspective there, and the information and list of our trainings is in the toolkit too. Yeah, other than that, I think you covered it, Rory. Does anyone have any questions about the toolkit specifically? We have about 4 minutes left, and thank you all for sticking around. I know it's almost Friday and y'all have so much always on your plates. Sweet. Just checking in.
I think it'd be great, Fel, if you came to the Wellness Collaborative.
Yeah.
For a training with Aruzu, what do you think about that? I think she's here. I think that would be awesome.
Yeah.
I was going to say, if people have ideas about how we can make sure that this really finds its way out into the whole educator community in Marin, that would be great too.
Dana is the executive director of the Spahr Center, in case anyone didn't know. Yeah, and we'll be bringing this toolkit whenever we do a training at a school. We'll send the toolkit to all the participants. If you're the leader of a PTA, parent trainings, that's the other one that I was forgetting. So if you're the leader of a PTA or work with your PTA, we can come in and speak with you as well. And the recording will be posted on the MCOE website. There's a LGBTQ equity page, and we'll also send out both the toolkit, that webpage, and the recording to everyone who signed up on Eventbrite.
Yeah, that'll go out in the next day or so, probably tomorrow. But let me just put in the website that is where it will be hosted, just so you have it. And I already added the toolkit to that, so that's there.
You're awesome. Thank you so much, Michelle.
You're awesome. This was amazing. Thank you so much for this insight.
Of course. Well, if there are no other questions, I just want to say an eternity of thank yous to the students who are doing this work. Thank you so much for speaking and for working on it and bringing your experiences and insight and expertise to this work in this space. And thank you all so much for the folks who are here and listening and committed to doing this work. It's so lovely to know that there's 57 people who are in it with us and so many more as well.
Absolutely.
If you need anything, I will put my email in the chat and you can just send me an email directly if there's anything to talk through. Alrighty. Great. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, everyone, thank you so much. Appreciate it. To the students, to Fel, to Rory, thank you so much. Really pleasure. And I appreciate your vulnerability and sharing your honest experiences and how we can grow and move forward. Okay, should we all do a big wave? Okay, have a good day, everyone.
Take care.
Bye-bye.